Okay, in a more normal time in this church and in churches all over the world, this would be a very noisy day. We call this Palm Sunday, and it is deeply embedded in our tradition to hold parades with little kids waving palm branches and everyone singing loud songs. We are remembering a day very long ago when Jesus of Nazareth came into the city of Jerusalem. So a makeshift parade formed up, kind of a flash mob. People who were followers of Jesus right alongside a lot of locals, holding a big party, welcoming Jesus into the city loudly. Whether they knew him personally or had only heard about this preacher from up north in Galilee, he was causing quite a stir. Stories were circulating that he was something very, very special, not your run-of-the-mill teacher and preacher and performer of miracles, because they had all seen those types come and go. No, this Jesus, he was different. For one thing, he was questioning in public a lot of assumptions and breaking a lot of social conventions and religious expectations. He'd been hanging out with people you were not supposed to be seen with. The people who were the religious leaders said they were unworthy, sinful, and beyond the limits of God's love. Jesus didn't care about any of that. He said that was nonsense. In what he said consistently and in what he did, he broadened the reach of who could be invited and accepted and loved to include everyone. And that was a real threat to the religious authorities. Their whole concept of religion was that you drew a firm line that separated the worthy from the unworthy. But Jesus, he was saying that line really doesn't exist. It's only in your mind. There is no such barrier in the mind of God. And that idea was so powerful and so liberating. Some people believe Jesus might be the Messiah, God's own anointed one, who would restore justice and peace in a place and time when that was badly needed. So they threw him a parade befitting a Messiah, a king. We know now what those folks that day could never have imagined, that within a week, Jesus would be executed for crimes against the state, for claiming to be the king in a Roman Empire where there could only be one Caesar, one king. It was a trumped-up charge brought by the people he threatened most, the men who wanted to hold on to their power and authority, the guys who believed that only they knew the right way of believing, that their interpretation of religion was the one and only truth. They just couldn't handle that Jesus lived and taught something different. It wasn't religion, really, but something much bigger than religion. A religion is about believing in one particular way as the only way. But I believe Jesus broke down the walls of that entire idea. He didn't live and teach religion. Jesus lived and taught steadfast love. And steadfast love was the refrain of that song those people sang in the Palm Sunday parade that was held to honor and celebrate Jesus. They were singing Psalm 118. Now, we don't know the melody, but we do know the lyrics. Steadfast love endures forever. Now, in Hebrew, steadfast love is actually just a single word, hesed. I'll show that to you. It's a small word with a ton of meaning. Depending on the context, it can mean mercy, kindness, goodness, and loving covenant obligation. It's usually used to describe God's posture toward us, but it can also be applied to our relationships with each other. I'll never forget when either of my sons were born. On both occasions, after my wife had done all the hard work, and I was really just this standby cheerleader, my son was handed to me. With my first son, Harry especially, I was so dumbfounded by the reality that I was a father holding my child and that I had this awesome responsibility all of a sudden. I mean, in my head, I felt like I was prepared. I knew what was coming, but my heart could never have been prepared for that. Holding him and gazing into his eyes, much more powerful than the sense of responsibility, was an overwhelming love I had never known before. It was fiercely protective, and like a promise I knew that I could never break. It was an obligation, but one that I eagerly embraced. I wasn't entirely sure I was up to the task of being a father because there's no instruction manual for that, but I was willing to die trying. And there was nothing that could have ever kept me from loving him completely and for all time. I think it was the moment that I finally, truly grew up, because it was the day I fully understood steadfast love. So that is Hesed, steadfast love. The true nature of the love God has for you and me, and the way that we are meant to love each other. Which also means steadfast love is about loving even in those moments that don't look like a young father holding a newborn baby. That's a nice snapshot. But steadfast love is also loving when loving is not the easy or the natural thing to do. It's also about mercy and sacrifice and patience and endurance. It's about when that same kid gets a little bit older and throws apple juice all over your computer, and the project you've been working on for a whole week is trashed because you forgot to back it up. Steadfast love means that we understand the bigger picture of what matters most, that projects of any kind don't matter as much as the people we love. Steadfast love also means that the obligation you're eager to keep means doing the right thing even when you're pressured to go another way. Did you ever see the movie called 42? Came out a few years ago. It is a biopic about Jackie Robinson, who in 1947 became the first African American to play Major League Baseball. It's all about Jackie's heroism in the face of incredible racism and discrimination, how he struggled with that and journeyed through that with almost superhuman poise and dignity. There's a scene in the film based on an actual incident. Jackie played for the Brooklyn Dodgers, and during a game in Cincinnati, Jackie's playing second base, and the fans are jeering and shouting these ugly, loud racial slurs. And one of Jackie's teammates, well, he was a shortstop who grew up just across the state line, just across the river from Cincinnati, a guy from Kentucky whose name was Pee Wee Reese. And in the midst of all that horrible yelling and screaming, Pee Wee causes the game to come to a complete halt by walking over to Jackie and placing his arm around him for a long moment in a very public show of support and solidarity. Now, Jackie was not being rescued or protected by a white man. He needed no rescue. But Pee Wee Reese did not need to embrace him either. Pee Wee had nothing to gain. And in that time, not that long ago, he had so much to lose by making that gesture. Because he did it practically in his own backyard. It was his own friends and neighbors and family members in that crowd screaming all of those racist insults. But he did it anyway. Years later, Pee Wee was asked about that day, and he said, "I was just trying to make the world a little better." That's what you're supposed to do with your life, isn't it? That's Hesed too. Steadfast love. Taking a risk, standing up for what's right when you know you will face scorn, especially when it involves breaking down barriers that separate people. Today, we are engaged in a protracted and traumatic moment of uncertainty and fear. In our lifetimes, we have never experienced anything like this. And it's in moments of uncertainty and fear and anxiety when we most often see one of two things happening: people building up walls or people breaking down barriers. Those who build up walls believe they're protecting themselves. They see the world through the lens of us versus them, through the philosophy of my way is right and your way is wrong. And all too often, our own faith has been misused like that, as a barrier instead of a bridge. And that's exactly the way it was in the time of Jesus, too, when religion was a life and death sport. But there is another way, and that's the path of steadfast love. It's the way of tearing down barriers. It's an awakening to the enormous covenant responsibility and devotion we all have for the care and protection of each other. Steadfast love is about proclaiming, this is the day I am growing up to the fact that we are interconnected and interdependent with everyone, everywhere. It's an acknowledgement that we may not feel up to the task, that we may be exhausted and frightened and overwhelmed, and that what we're living through is risky and scary, but that we still have the power of love and the help of each other to see us through. And we will see it through. It won't be easy, and it won't be over tomorrow. But believe in this: God's steadfast love for you and me and everyone around this world we share endures forever. That love has no limit of time. That love has no barrier of place. That love has no wall of race or nationality or religion. It just is. It is the one true reality above all others. And this is the moment, this is the day to celebrate that love and to make it real. So let all people say, God's steadfast love endures forever. And no matter what, this is the day that the Lord has made. So let's rejoice and be glad in it.